I've had the great fortune of spending the week with the 2021 Chevy Suburban High Country. It's a $75,000 luxury 3-row SUV, and it's the biggest thing that I've ever spent time with or reviewed or anything. Let's get into it. We're going to start where we usually do, and that's under the hood. We're going to talk about the engine. It's a 6.2 liter naturally aspirated V8. It makes about 420 horsepower, and for the size of the vehicle, that's about enough. Now, it doesn't have a turbocharger, so the power comes on really smooth and buttery, and you really start to feel it build right around 3,000 RPM, which is about halfway up the rev band. Additionally, when you get to about $3,000, you start to hear that exhaust a little bit more. However, this is not the RST trim, this is the High Country, so it's the most luxury focus, so you don't have a snarling V8. You have a more subdued exhaust. It's not incredibly loud, but it is very smooth power delivery, and it does sound pretty decent, even though it's not rah-rah in your face. And that brings us to transmission, and we have GM's in-house built 10-speed gearbox here. It's a normal torque converted automatic, and it's fine. It's not incredibly inspiring. It's got 10 speeds for, maximum fuel economy, but I guess the most interesting and quirky thing is that they've, again, kind of reinvented how the transmission looks and operates within the cabin. We used to just have a normal column-mounted shifter, and then it went down towards the center console, and now there's a whole bunch of dials and FCA products and Fords and all that stuff. Well, GM has the park button is push, I think reverse is pull, neutral is push, drive is pull, and then there's it's weird, but I get it saves space, and boy, they have plenty of that. Now with that, I want to kind of talk about the steering and the dynamics and the handling of the vehicle, because I think this is the most important and the most distinguishing difference between this generation versus the previous. Now, the steering is what you would expect. It's incredibly light, it's electronically assisted, and you really don't feel anything. There's not really much deadness on center, but with a 3-ton plus SUV, you're not expecting a lot of great steering feedback, which is okay. Again, this is the High Country, it's the luxury one. That's not the most important thing. The nice thing is, it is really light steering. So when I'm maneuvering around a parking lot or my driveway, I've got one of those circle driveways that you can kind of whatever, but this thing is so long, it's nice to be able to make those quick inputs really easily without ranking and cranking on the steering wheel too much. Now, this leads me to the most important thing, and I want to talk dynamics and suspension. This is the first Suburban to get not only an independent rear suspension, but also air suspension, and it transforms the way this thing drives. I think I mentioned earlier I drove the previous generation Tahoe RST, so a little bit shorter and the more sport-oriented version. Had a live axle in the back, and basically whenever you would go and turn the wheel, it would just bounce you around like just an absolute crazy mess. This does a lot better. The back is really well sorted. It drives a lot more like a car and less like a body-on-frame truck. Now, the independent rear suspension is great, but the most important thing that really came through in the driving experience for me over the past week was the air suspension. It is fantastic. Chevy and GM have done a great job tuning it. The spring rates and the rebound adapts depending on your drive mode. So you have a tow haul mode, you have an off-road mode that jacks the suspension up, you have much more travel and rebound, and then you can kind of turn it into a sport mode. And of course it makes your transmission work a little bit quicker and your engine respond faster, but it kind of squats the car down a little bit, and then it reduces some of that rebound rate that you would get from a normal spring or damper system. So in any case, whatever it is, it works really, really well. Now, before we get into interior and exterior, I do want to talk a little bit more about that towing. You do have that tow mode, and the suspension is ready to adapt to it. The interesting thing is this High Country has the 6.2 V8 with 420 horsepower. It tows 7,900 pounds, which is pretty good. And now I want to talk about exterior design, and there's some good things to talk about here. The previous generation Tahoe Suburban was just a box. That was it. It was just a square on wheels, and the design team just didn't break a sweat. Thank God they've gotten away from that. There's a little bit more nuance, there's a little bit more sophistication in the design. There's a lot more going, especially in this High Country. Let's start from the front. In the grille, you have a chrome grille with the bow tie that you would expect. However, within that grille, you have kind of interwoven like copper or gold slatting which is specific to the high country and looks really cool. Then within your grille you have those kind of Chevy Silverado-esque DRLs that are LED, and they look pretty good, but again, kind of cheating off of the Silverado, but we'll move past it. In any case, you wrap around to the side a little bit and you see a nice big high country badge because you paid for the most expensive high country and the most expensive Suburban, so why not brag about it a little bit? So you have that there. You also have specific high country wheels, which are big in chrome and look good because chrome means luxury to GM, and fine, looks good. It does look good. I think the wheels and the badging and the front fascia definitely suit the personality of the vehicle. But then as you start to move back down the truck, you have the big Suburban badge that's on the front doors, on the driver and the passenger side, and you have some electronically deploying running boards, and they deploy at like, if they were even half of a second slower, it would be infuriating, but they deploy just in time for you to get out and put your foot down there. And then as we get around to the back of the vehicle, there's a couple things to note. One is the big chrome mustache that goes across the length of the Bourbon. And then down at the bottom, you have quad exhaust because, I don't know, you spent 75 grand, so why not have quad exhaust? Overall, like I mentioned, the design is just a little bit more thought out. There's a little bit more sophistication and nuance, and you get some specific things for the high country package. So they do a good job at making that extra dollar expenditure worth it. Let's talk interior. So GM has a reputation when it comes to interiors, specifically with materials. However, this is the high country and it is 75 grand, and it's worth it when you get into the interior, at least based on what I'm seeing. All of the plastics, the cheap kind of scratchy plastics that you would find in a cheaper down market version of this vehicle are not here. All of the plastics have kind of a nice kind of textured film to it. There's aluminums, there's nice stitching and piping and perforation of the leather, and it looks really good and it feels really good. It does feel pretty well made. I shook the center console and there was really no creaking or rattling. And then speaking of design, here's my favorite thing about the high country. Do you remember when we were talking about the exterior and we talked about that gold slatting in the grille? Well, they brought it onto the interior. So it's in the kind of stalks on your steering wheel. There's little accents on the center console, and your seats, like they're a dark, a black leather, but they have kind of that perforation, and inside the perforation is kind of like a goldish brown, kind of bronzish color to kind of reflect what they've done on the outside. So this is what I'm talking about. Like, yes, it's the high country, it's expensive, but they've done a lot more attention to detail. They've done a lot more elevation in terms of making this a luxury SUV. I do have two little, not complaints, but they're just little weird quirks on the interior. One is on the passenger side of the head unit, which is the old infotainment, by the way, we'll get to that. You have this little cubby thing. It's, I don't know, about that big. It's not big enough to put your phone or wallet or anything useful, and you can't just open it by sliding it. You have to like squeeze it. There's a lever. Why? Why, GM? I don't get it. The second thing is the gauge cluster. It is mostly digital, and I know I keep harping on this, but it is the high country and it's the most expensive one. Give me a fully digital gauge cluster because the Speedo and the TAC and Speedo, are like the same as like a Silverado from like the early 2000s. It's classic GM font, and I get it, but it's not modern, and this is the high country, and it's so expensive. Now I want to talk about technology, and I want to start with the HUD, the head-up display. Now, the HUD is huge. Like, it's not going to come through in the camera footage that you're seeing, but it is massive. You can't make it smaller. You can move it up and down, you can turn it off, but you can't make it smaller. It's not really... It was bordering on distracting during my week with the car. I think the thing that was the most distracting was the way that it reads the vehicles in front of you. It doesn't read by like feet or distance or none of that. It reads in like time gap. So like I watch Formula One, and if you watch any kind of racing, you know you have a time interval between how far the guy is in front of you. So I'm like, okay, I'm closing the gap to, Lewis Hamilton. It was weird, but it was like kind of a fun game that I was playing, but it kind of like subconsciously kind of encouraged you to get a little closer. If you do get within half a second, then that car on your HUD turns gold or like amber or whatever color to kind of indicate, okay, back off. But it's just kind of a weird little quirk, but the resolution is fantastic. The information that you get there is cool. It's just kind of interesting the way they've done like a time interval between the vehicles. So interesting, kind of cool. And then as far as like usability and technology, you have of course all of the modern safety equipment. You've got lane keep assist, adaptive cruise, blind spot, all that stuff. You've got Apple CarPlay, Android Auto. It's all fantastic. The best thing that I experienced was actually the body cameras all over the truck. So you have the reverse camera, forward camera, and the crystal clear resolution was immaculate. Like, it's better than the camera that I'm filming this on right now. It's just so good. And you have the cameras under your wing mirrors, and it was actually really helpful because, like I mentioned before, I have a driveway that kind of circles, so that's where I keep my press cars for the week. So this thing being so long, it's nice to have that because, you know, it snowed and my driveway is not that thick or wide, so it's nice to kind of be able to position the car a little bit better with those cameras and have such a crystal clear display. So overall, the technology on this Chevy is pretty good, and I haven't ever really had issues with the GM infotainment system or any of their real technology stuff. It's all been pretty decent, not class leading, but definitely not lagging. The issue that I run into now is that this 2021 is the same generation, same year and model year as the Escalade. And yeah, you pay a little bit more for the Escalade, but the Escalade runs on a totally new software. And it's not like, okay, the dash is a little bit different and the skinning is, no, it's totally different, like a new software. This Suburban gets the old technology. Kind of a ripoff. Now I want to talk about space and comfort. We're going to start up front. Steering wheel is heated, great. The seats are cool, great. And then in classic GM fashion, it's a heated seat, but it can also be just a heated back. I haven't seen that in any other vehicles. It's totally unique to GM, and I think it's pretty cool. I don't mind it. Overall, the seats are really comfortable. I love the piping and kind of the uniqueness that kind of mirrors and brings in that accent color from the grille and the steering wheel and all that stuff. And the perforation on the leather is really nice. And overall, it's really comfy. The thing that I didn't get the feeling of was I didn't feel like I had a whole lot of space up front. It felt like I was right up against the center console, which is cavernous and huge, and there's a lot of storage there. But like, I didn't feel like I had a lot of room to like spread out when I was driving or in the passenger seat. The thing that you kind of get that feeling of big expansiveness is when you get to the second row. The captain's chairs in the second row are like comically skinny. And it's not a bad thing. It's just when you look at them objectively, you're like, that's a skinny seat. Which makes for the middle pass-through to be huge and super easy to get back there. But it looks kind of funny. Again, the second row, the seats are comfy and they fold down really well. And if you don't want to fold them down, you can leave them up and get through to the third row super easily, which brings me to the third row. And this is where the previous generation really fell off for me. Since it had the live axle, that kind of ate into the floor. So if you were in the third row, you were basically eating your knees because your feet were basically up, halfway up your chest. So that was really uncomfortable and really impeded into space with that live axle. Now that you have an independent rear suspension, you have all that floor space back, which means you have more headroom, you have more clearance, it feels bigger, you have the massive pano roof that goes all the way back, and it just feels so much bigger. I'm 6'1", I put the driver's seat where I would normally sit, I had a couple inches of knee room in front of me in the second row. Left that seat where it was, got into the third row, sat behind that, and I still had a couple inches. Like, far and away, massive improvement over the previous generation. Plenty of space, even for adults. You can absolutely fit, 7 people in there all day, every day. Which brings us to the trunk, and this again is something that I was super impressed with. Every generation, every update, the vehicles get longer and wider and bigger on the interior, and you kind of expect that. However, I don't know, it was just perfect. It was exactly what you want from a 3-row SUV to haul all your kids and all their crap. Not all your kids or all their crap, both. You can do it all in this thing. You don't need to get one of those roof tubes. Okay, so at this point we've kind of talked about the engine and the transmission, the dynamics and how the car drives. We've talked about the exterior looks and the interior design and the materials and the space in the car, going to practicality and towing and all that sort of stuff. So the car is basically sorted. There's a couple things that I want to make sure I talk about though, because I want to talk about gimmicks. Every vehicle these days has a gimmick, or like a play, or a selling feature, or something to make the marketers' lives easier. And there's not a lot going on in the Suburban. This is a pretty utilitarian SUV, but it is the high country and it is $75,000+. So that you do get a few things. Now, we talked about that gold accenting or the bronze accenting in the grille that's mirrored in kind of the seats and the piping in the front, and your steering wheel and your center console, and that looks pretty cool. You also have your high country badge that's on the front fenders before you get to the front doors, and again, nice. Kind of a little braggy, but nice. You also get high country specific wheels, and those look good as well. You get the electronic deploying running boards, and you get the quad exhaust. Okay, not too crazy, but just some nice stuff. However, there is one thing on the interior that you should definitely take note of, especially if you have younger kids. And kids these days, they have phones at the age of like 14 months. And so basically, if you're gonna put kids in the back seat, you have a rear seat entertainment system. And normally you'd have like a little thing that hangs down from the ceiling, and then you can watch Finding Nemo or whatever. No, it's attached to the back of the headrests on the driver and the passenger seat, and you can like cast like a Google Home or like a Google Chromecast or Amazon Fire Stick or whatever. You can cast your phone and mirror the display onto the rear seat entertainment package. Pretty cool. I did get it to work. It wasn't totally perfect, but it comes with headphones, and I think given a little bit more time with the vehicle and a little bit more practice, it would work pretty well. The interesting thing is I've seen other journalists test this car and the Tahoe, and you have them kind of fold down those second row seats, those captain's chairs, and the headrest will just bash the screen on the rear seat entertainment system. I tested that like 3 or 4 times, and I recorded it in slow-mo, and I'll play it for you here. It gets so close, but they must have fixed it because that must have been a pre-production vehicle or whatever. Like, I had the seat pulled up as far as I could, I had the headrest up, I folded it down, and then like just as the headrest is about to hit the screen, the headrest goes down, and then it misses it. Every time. I did it like 3 or 4 times, and it worked every single time. So I don't know if GM's fixed this over the last 2 months or whatever, but hey, I mean, that's the perk of being a small journalist that doesn't get stuff right away. Now, those are kind of like the flashy marketing perks, but to me, as a vehicle enthusiast or car enthusiast, the big gimmick or perk that really sells me on the vehicle is the air suspension, is the independent rear suspension. It transforms the drivability of the car. It's so much easier to drive, it's so much more luxurious, and it's so much more worth what they're asking for it. Absolutely, air suspension, hands down, best thing about this thing. Now, I want to get into the final thoughts, and for that, I kind of took a few notes here, and I want to talk about competitors and price. So at 75,000 grand to start with the high country package, it's a lot of money. And here's kind of what it competes against. And this is, again, this is like the massive 3-row family hauler things. So you can get a Ford Expedition. It's got a twin turbo V6. I haven't spent a lot of time with this, but I can't imagine it'd be much better. And you don't get a V8, so next. Yukon XL, just the GMC version of this. It's an additional $6 grand to kind of go, spec for spec or package for package on the GMC, and typically I steer people away from GMC because typically my experience is they've been carbon copies of the Chevy. However, I did do a little bit more research into the Yukon XL, and honestly, I might spend the $6 grand extra because that thing looks money. Then you've got your Toyotas, you've got a Land Cruiser. No, a person buying the Suburban is not going to look at a Land Cruiser, nor the Sequoia. Those are ancient kind of, reliability over everything, and that's Toyota's way. I don't see someone cross-shopping that here. And then you've got your Nissan Armada. It's new-ish, I think. No. It's a no for me, dog.
It's definitely a no for me, dog.
Okay, so kind of covered that. There's none of those direct competitors really, except for maybe the GMC version of the Yukon XL, except for the Yukon XL really kind of revs my engine in any one way over the Suburban High Country. The problem for me is that the Escalade exists, and the Escalade starts at $76,000. Now that's the shorter wheelbase version, it's like the Tahoe version, but it's only $1 grand extra. And then you get, a better design, in my opinion. Same supple ride from an air suspension. You get more luxury, better build materials. You get that new technology in the head unit, like I mentioned. It's a totally different and redesigned interior that looks incredible. The new Escalade is really banging. So yeah, you're gonna spend a little bit extra money, but you also then get an Escalade and all of the pomp that goes along with having an Escalade. People that don't know a lot about cars will look at a Suburban and be like, oh yeah, it's cool. Suburban's one of the longest running nameplates in history, but there's something about an Escalade that people are like, damn, that's a baller ass ride. So if it were me, I might pony up a little bit of the extra money, because at 75 grand I'm spending, I might as well get the Escalade. So with that, I absolutely loved my time with the Suburban High Country this week, so thank you to Chevy for hooking it up, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Absolutely a great vehicle. Go out and check it out, and I'll see you next time.